At 14:07 on May 27, 1905, a single 12-inch shell tore through the compass bridge of the battleship Mikasa and killed the most celebrated admiral of the age. The man who died in that instant, Togo Heihachiro, commanded the combined fleet of Japan, and in our history, he survived that afternoon to win the most complete naval victory since Trafalgar. In this alternate timeline exploration, we examine what could have happened and why the real history unfolded differently. To understand what that shell destroyed, you have to understand how much had already been spent. The Russo-Japanese War had opened on the night of February 8, 1904, with Japanese torpedo boats striking the Russian squadron at Port Arthur before any declaration of war. Port Arthur itself fell on January 20, 1905, but the siege cost General Nogi's Third Army roughly 60,000 casualties. At Mukden between February 20 and March 10, Japan won again and bled so badly it could never force another major battle on land. The empire was winning, and it was running out of men, money, and time. Russia's answer had been steaming toward Japan for 7 months. Rozhestvensky's Second Pacific Squadron left Libau on October 15, 1904, and dragged itself 18,000 nautical miles around the world, nearly bringing Britain into the war at Dogger Bank, where jittery Russian gunners fired on English fishing trawlers. Its mission was simple and desperate: break through to Vladivostok, the last Russian naval base on the Pacific. Everything both empires had wagered would be settled in the Tsushima Strait, but what no one on either flagship could know, what would not become clear for years, was that the fate of 2 revolutions and the shape of the coming century in Asia rode on the next 2 minutes. Togo did exactly what he did in our history. At about 14:05, with the Z flag flying, the empire's fate depends on this one battle. Let every man do his utmost. He ordered his line to turn in succession, each ship pivoting through the same point of water, in full view and full range of the Russian guns. It was a deliberate gamble to cross the Russian T, and it invited exactly the fire it received. In actual history, Mikasa was struck more than 30 times at Tsushima, and her admiral lived. This timeline requires no new Russian skill, no invented weapon, only different luck. At 14:07, a 12-inch shell from the Knyaz Suvorov burst on Mikasa's exposed compass bridge. Togo died where he stood, along with his flag staff. The flagship staggered out of line, her bridge a ruin, and for a quarter of an hour the finest battle fleet in Asia was a headless column mid-turn under concentrated fire. Command passed, uncertainly and by signal lamp, to Vice Admiral Kamimura Hikonojo aboard the armored cruiser Izumo, a capable officer inheriting a formation that had lost its shape, its rhythm, and its nerve in a single flash of cordite. Kamimura was not a fool, and by evening he had restored order, but the battle Togo would have fought never happened. The murderous, coordinated gunnery concentration that in our history dismantled the Russian line ship by ship dissolved into a series of ragged, separate engagements. The night torpedo attacks, which should have been the closing of a trap, were pressed piecemeal by destroyer flotillas that no longer knew where the trap was. Rozhestvensky still paid a terrible price. Several of his ships went down or fell out burning. His squadron that limped into Vladivostok on May 29th was battered, half-crippled, and in no condition to contest the Sea of Japan. This must be said plainly: Russia did not win at Tsushima, but it did not lose, and against an enemy whose entire war depended on annihilation, survival was enough. A fleet in being now sat at Vladivostok, and in banking houses 6,000 miles away, men who had never seen a warship began to do arithmetic. Japan had fought this war on credit. Takahashi Korekiyo, vice-governor of the Bank of Japan, had spent a year in London and New York raising the foreign loans that kept the armies in Manchuria fed and armed, with Jacob Schiff of Kuhn, Loeb and Company arranging the critical American purchases. Every issue had been sold on a story: Japan wins its battles. Now the cables reaching the bond markets told a different story. The combined fleet had lost its admiral and failed to stop the Russians. The Fourth War Loan stalled. Prices on existing Japanese bonds sagged, and Takahashi found doors that had opened easily in January, now opening slowly, at worse terms or not at all. The government in Tokyo confronted the figure it had been outrunning for a year. The war now cost more each month than the empire could borrow. Mukden had emptied the army's depots. Tsushima had emptied the treasury's credibility. The consequences would prove catastrophic for Japan's leaders. But to see why, we have to look first at the capital of their enemy, where the mood was transforming by the day. Theodore Roosevelt's offer of mediation arrived in a St. Petersburg that no longer wanted it. The Russian Navy was loudly claiming a strategic triumph. The squadron had reached Vladivostok, had it not. And Nicholas II, who had always seen this war as a matter of dynastic prestige, now believed the enemy was breaking. He declined to send a delegation. There was no Portsmouth. Sergei Witte, the ablest statesman the empire possessed, and the man who would have led that delegation, was left standing outside a conference that never convened. Russia's strategy became the simplest one available. Wait. The Trans-Siberian Railway fed fresh divisions into Manchuria month after month, while Japan's exhausted army held its lines and could do nothing but hold them. Katsurataro's government searched quietly, almost desperately, for any exit that preserved face. Time, which had been Japan's enemy since the first shot at Port Arthur, now worked for the Tsar alone. Russia in 1905 was still a country on fire. Bloody Sunday, the massacre of petitioning workers in St. Petersburg on January 22nd, had ignited strikes, mutinies, and peasant risings long before the fleets ever met, and none of that unrest vanished because ships reached Vladivostok. But the revolution now faced an autocracy that had not been publicly humiliated at sea, and the difference proved decisive. The army's loyalty held. Guard regiments and Cossack squadrons broke the general strikes in the capitals with a confidence they did not possess in our history. Nicholas II issued no October manifesto. There was no Duma, no constitutional experiment, only courts-martial, punitive expeditions, and silence. Witte's moment, the moment when a shaken Tsar might have accepted limits on his own power, simply never arrived. The autocracy survived 1905 intact. Whether surviving unreformed was a victory or only a postponement is a question this timeline would answer within a decade. In our history, Tokyo crowds rioted in Hibiya Park because the Treaty of Portsmouth seemed too lenient after so much sacrifice. In this timeline, the rage was of another order entirely. There was no treaty to denounce, only an inconclusive war, bought with 100,000 dead, ending in a face-saving armistice and a national debt Japan would service for a generation. Martial law held the streets, but nothing could hold the sense of betrayal. The oligarchs survived the storm, the only way they could, by promising redemption. Togo became a martyr, his death at the moment of his gamble transformed into the founding legend of a navy that would someday finish what he began. But the real money, what little there was, flowed elsewhere, to the army and to Korea, annexed early and governed harshly as the one prize the war had unambiguously secured. Japan turned its face away from the open Pacific and toward the Asian mainland, nursing a grievance with a name and an address. And then, over the following decade, came the alignment of forces that would define everything after. Neither empire ever believed the war was truly over. Russia kept its Pacific Fleet in being and its pride intact, but pride was all the autocracy had modernized. The same unreformed regime, carrying the same fractures that 1905 had exposed and repression had merely papered over, now drifted toward the European crises of the 1910s with a permanent second front looming in Manchuria. Every division watching the Balkans was a division not watching Harbin. Japan, its bond with Britain loosened by defeat and its politics hardened by debt, built its doctrine around a single premise. The next war with Russia would come, and it would come when Russia was distracted in the West. Two empires, both wounded, both unbeaten in their own telling, rearming against each other across the same disputed ground. This is what a single shell purchased at 1407 on a May afternoon, not because one man's death decided history by itself, but because Japan's empty treasury and Russia's dynastic pride were already primed, waiting only for a verdict that never came. In our history, Tsushima delivered that verdict in an afternoon, and the world moved on. In this one, the question was left open, and wars that end without an answer have a way of asking the question again.